First off, I just wanted to thank you for all your time today. I think that talk really set up the stage for the discussion here, because I think this brings us to a lot of the current discussions we're having within, myself and Matt Lowe and a lot of the other presenters are maybe more into the physiotherapy professions, but these issues obviously exist well beyond the borders of any profession. But I'm curious, because one of the big things we talk about with maybe moving things forward as far as better helping, because you mentioned 50% of people or 50% of medical conditions are maybe medically unexplained. We don't have that nice linear, I can put my thumb on the cause that always equals the same effect type thing. I'm just curious, and I know Cause Health, you guys have discussed this a bit, as far as where you think the narrative approach fits within this, as far as you discussed also, these mutual manifestation partners that need to exist, yet that exist in us all, that exist in any context. I'm just curious where you think, narrative-based medicine approach, maybe where it exists currently today, and where you think it kind of fits well with this dispositionalist framework.
Yeah, because a lot of the clinicians in our network, they come from a phenomenological background, and they had been forced into phenomenology. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but they have to go phenomenological in order to be able to care about the patients' stories and their own experience of illness and their history, because it's not considered causally relevant. The problem is that if you go for that perspective, you almost have to go on board with the idea that, yes, I'm going to care about the narrative, but it's not going to teach me anything about causation. So this is what we want to bring. We want to bring that in, because if you see a patient who has a lot of unexplained symptoms, and they can be very physical, there could be, for instance, obesity and eating disorders. There could also be depression. There could be poor dental health. There could be all sorts of things, and you have tried to maybe treat those individually and medically. And then if you talk to someone and you see, like Anna Louise Kirkengen, she's a general practitioner in our network, and she says a lot of her patients who she has seen with chronic illness, they have some kind of trauma in their history. And when she gets patients where she can see that they suddenly started entering the health services at age 14, for instance, and all of these complaints that came in seemed unrelated, but they never improved. They never got help from the standard treatments. She would ask, what happened to you at age 14? Why do you think that you have all these problems? And if people can say, well, I was sexually abused by a close relative, or I experienced violence, and prolonged stress, then actually that could causally explain a lot of the symptoms that people have. So if you have chronic stress, for instance, that is a cause of a lot of chronic inflammation. But this is something that it hasn't been taken seriously. Well, I think it's taken seriously now, but it hasn't been part of this standard biomedical model, because then it seems like something social and relational can make you biomedically ill. which shouldn't be possible under the Cartesian dualist idea that mind and body is separate. You know, there should be physical causes for physical symptoms, and we have another general practitioner, Kai Brynjar Hagen, who works with people with severe obesity, and he says that in the healthcare system now, the idea is that if they only lose weight and we put in all of our efforts for them to lose weight, then all their other problems are going to go away. And he assesses people before they have a bariatric surgery. So it's quite invasive. They remove the whole stomach so people won't be hungry and not eat. And he says, but when I assess them, I talk to them maybe for 1 or 2 hours, and I learn a lot about their life. And from what I see, many of these people, the obesity for them is a result of an eating disorder. But obesity is not the eating disorder. It's not diagnosed as an eating disorder. If they had anorexia, they would have eating disorder and they would get help in the mental health services. But because they are obese, it's seen as a lifestyle issue. And then there's one intervention, and it's to lose weight. But he says some of these people might have used to starve themselves or harm themselves or try to kill themselves, or, and to overeat is just one way to tackle their deeper issues. And he says, if we don't find out what is the real cause of people's symptoms, then we cannot give them a proper treatment, because then we're treating only the symptoms and not the causes that are underlying their problems. So he thinks it's actually quite abusive to not listen to people's narratives, because those narratives are going to show you what this unique case is about, which kinds of external and internal stressors were there.
And that you mentioned in your talk too the issue with guidelines and this packaged solution that we tend to propose to people, but it seems like there's an obviousness to the fact that the individual oftentimes in that narrative gets lost in guideline-based care, because it becomes, this is what you get, irregardless of those mutual manifestation partners that may or may not exist in your life, because we're going to just treat you based on the guideline. I'm curious, in healthcare systems where there's such definitely here in the United States, especially, where decisions and care pathways become much more motivated on maybe economical efficiency, where some of these thoughts with traditional healthcare, which again we're trying to move against, is that this looking at N=1 is an inefficient way to get to a treatment to help a population. Yet we see that these issues that again, where it doesn't fit this nice, neat, linear pathway. Of course, sometimes it does in certain medical circumstances, but I'm curious what your thoughts are on, what's the balance between, and this is a tough question, so of course, all these questions are things to ponder and think about, but where's the balance between some standardization of clinical care that at least raises the bar of quality of care versus that pursuit completely losing that N=1 individual, and that narrative that obviously can be a huge component of what determines what kind of effects are manifested if out of some of these people who have some complex stories and some complex narratives with a lot of complex dispositions present in their story.
Well, I call it the clinical squeeze because when you sit with your individual patient and you're forced to use a population, a public health perspective and public health results, on that individual patient, then of course that creates an imbalance where you say that the people who were part of these clinical studies as individuals, their stories count. You know, in that case, what happened to them, it counts because it's evidence, because it was part of this formalized trial. But what happens here between the two of us, that's just an anecdote. And for me, that doesn't really make sense, because I think Roger Carey also says this in his PhD dissertation. He says that, well, if my patients were part of a clinical trial, yeah, then it would be evidence what happens to them. But when they are outside the trial, they're anecdotes. And I would ask, how many anecdotes does it take to make evidence under the Humean under the Humean and evidence-based approach? Because if you sit there with one person, you get a much more complex narrative and a much more complex image than if you're in a clinical trial where maybe you are mostly interested in the intervention and the expected outcome, the outcome that you want to have, but you miss out on a lot of other things. But I think this idea that from the public health perspective, you could say, but if you use the statistics, you don't have any theories of mechanism because that's speculation, but we have the data. Then we also know that this is more efficient than that for the population. So if everyone does this, then for the population, we're going to maximize utility on the group level. But in the individual case, you're maybe not maximizing utility at all if you're not that part of that 30% that would recover. So in the individual case, you might harm a whole bunch of people. And I think with the public health idea of evidence-based medicine, where we just count and don't speculate, we also lose out on this idea of who would be harmed, who would benefit. You know, because if you just give, for instance, statins to everyone who is in you know, a risk in a risk situation, then yeah, you're going to probably increase public health, you know, slightly. But if you look at these kind of numbers needed to treat, and you see that many interventions, you would have to maybe give it to 5, 10, 20 people for one to benefit, we're starting to talk about a lot of waste and a lot of potential side effects. And actually, I think the side effects issue is a huge public health problem that should be taken much more seriously. I think it is taken seriously, but it should be taken even more seriously. It's like the 4th to 6th biggest cause of death in the Western world. Side effects of drugs. And then the numbers needed to treat for maybe someone to lower their cholesterol or lower their blood pressure slightly. It's a huge cost if you also factor in that people might be mutual manifestation partners in all the cases where they are not mutual manifestation partners for the effect, they are mutual manifestation partners for a side effect or 2 or 3 or more.
Yeah, it's interesting to discuss. I sometimes just wonder what is how do we, and maybe I'd be interested in your thoughts as far as how do we balance that need to have some understanding of kind of, you know, general population effects, but not lose that complexity and that context that's unique to every interaction that you have with a patient, that you talk about in there, that every interaction is a unique context with the same person. You know, 1 week, you know, that those mutual manifestation partners may change the next time you see them a week later or 2 weeks later. So, you know, that balance between these kind of population big studies versus these, and you also pointed out how we look at evidence-based in that hierarchy of where that N=1 encounter, that case study or narrative really gets sunk to the bottom of what gets looked at as quality of evidence or hierarchy of evidence. I'm just curious what you think what would you pose as maybe some solutions or some thoughts on how we can, still maybe gain some balance of, and maybe gaining balance isn't the best way to put it, but what are maybe the ways we can research and better understand like these contexts and how we can study, these contexts where these mutual manifestation partners may exist to best include an out or to best produce a desired outcome. I'm just, obviously the linear Humean kind of, A plus B equals C approach and the billiard ball approach, while not completely useless, just in a lot of these complex states where there's just a lot of complex interactions going on, misses probably the mark. I'm just curious what you think. How can we better look at that and maybe research it?
So, for instance, it's not very rare that people have chronic illness. It's not that rare that people don't benefit from standard treatment. It could be a guideline that says when people don't benefit from the standard interventions, or you don't think that the standard interventions are safe for that individual, you need to spend more time trying to find out as much as you can about that patient and their background. It could be possible to say that you need to spend more time in the beginning, because what happens now is that everyone spends very little time, but overall many years. And if no one ever talks properly to people, then very valuable causal information will be lost that could give you a clue about what would be the best intervention and what would definitely not be the best intervention. But what we see is that we're trying to have such a cost and time efficient type of healthcare that you should know as little as possible and have as much statistical data as possible. And I would say that's actually a really dangerous way to go, because it's something you can learn from how often something happens. But there's a lot of things that you cannot learn from that, because something might happen very rarely, not because there aren't dispositions for it, but because we are counteracting it. Normally we would counteract the effect. So for instance, there could be something that the immune system is protecting you from by having a lot of backup security systems, but for someone who doesn't have that, they might react in a very different way. So if you just count, it would seem like 1 in a million, very low disposition, very weak disposition for this terrible outcome to happen. But actually for you as an individual, it might be huge, so your individual propensity might be very strong. And if I don't take that into consideration, or I don't even try to find out about your individual propensities and your relevant dispositions that could interact with this treatment, I would say that's morally very irresponsible. And when it comes to developing, for instance, medications or other interventions, if we do it blindly without any understanding of the mechanism, we might actually end up harming as many people as we are benefiting. And we also have to remember that these clinical trials, they happen under very specific conditions, because it's not everyone who is included either. You take out risk groups, you take out people who are chronic ill, vulnerable groups, people who are on many other drugs, so you have to end up with a very specific type of population. But then when the results are published, it seems like something is very efficient and very safe. But if you then factor in everything that you took out, then you see why you need to know something about the person in front of you before you start ditching these things out.
Mm-hmm.
I would say.
Yeah, no, those are great points. I liked what you said is, when do anecdotes become evidence, and like when does some of these, and we look at these things, and I've really been challenged from some like-minded folks to say, we call these things a subjective interview, like it's like these stories and these narratives aren't objective, so they're not like the true variables in the equation that we can really measure and study to determine what's making an effect. Yet, gosh, the research sure tells us that psychosocial factors and different things often have more predictive value. It's just hard for that empirical pauses where we want something that we can put an exact numerical quantitative value upon. Yet the human experience and the human condition just doesn't really allow for that in a lot of situations. And I don't even know what the question is that I'm trying to ask here, just because I guess I'm just reflecting on what you're discussing, and it kind of becomes this battle, and I shouldn't even say battle, but this kind of balance. And unfortunately, the balance has tipped so much to the quantifying and the, like you said, to where this efficiency and data collecting to the detriment of really understanding that n equals one person in front of you that may have a significant presence of dispositions that will make that standardized treatment that you're trying to deliver very non-effective, or like you said, even could become harmful in certain situations. And you bring some great
I think
points up.
there's also, yeah, I think there's also, it's a matter of undermining the profession. Because once you say, I don't care that you went to school for all these years to learn about these things and all these speculative theories of what works, and you have your favorite theories that you go by, we have the hardcore data. They show what is best to do and what is not best to do, and then what they're actually saying is that you didn't have to go to, physio school or medical school or whatever and learn all this stuff. All you had to do was to learn how to use these apps and perform these exercises. This is what you do in this case, this is what you do in that case, and the program will tell you. I think that's a dangerous way to go, but this happens in schools. It's not only in, it happens everywhere, that they say, ooh, this, we can see numbers from this context, they get very good results, everyone should do what they do. And then you say, well, in this context, those results might not apply because this is a very different context from that, and then it's all about trying to figure out what are the causally relevant factors, and then you need theories.
Yeah.
But it's much easier to administer, and it's much easier to have a top-down controlling system where you don't need to know what the people in the grassroots, as we call them, know, because you have the facts.
Yeah.
And you just look at the results. But if you look at the results, you're also missing out on something from the dispositionalist perspective, which is if you're very far away from that threshold effect, you can do a lot and you will get them much, much closer, but it's not going to be an observable outcome that will count in the data, or even if someone is very close to recovery and you remove them from that recovery by actually delaying recovery for them because your treatment is harming, then that's not going to show up either, So these observable outcomes is like all or nothings as well. It has to be measured by something. So that's why you can't really get past understanding what's actually happening there beneath the surface. You cannot just test and control and test and control, but you can talk to people.
Yeah.
You can ask them, do you think you're better off now than you were before, or do you think you're worse off? Do you feel now you're closer to recovery? No, that's anecdote. And what do people know about themselves? Who are they to know?
How dare they try to claim understanding of what they're experiencing? Yeah. No, it's interesting. And a lot of it goes to, you've spoke to the narrative and talking to that person, like you just said. I'm curious, and I know you're probably doing this a bit with your interactions with students and things. I'm just curious. I think it's pretty easy to see that the humanities are kind of missing a lot from healthcare as far as the different things that form that person's perception and beliefs and understandings of themselves and how they think and behave in the world. I'm curious, what if you could have the perfect curriculum or something that you would say, you know, healthcare practitioners need to kind of, because we know they're getting the biomedicals, the anatomies, the kinesiologies, the biomechanics, all these things that we get bombarded with physio, but we miss that N=1 skill oftentimes, although, you know, there's some classes that might help us a little bit. I'm curious, what kind of humanities things do you think, if we could better interject into curriculums of healthcare professional training, do you think would help, you know, maybe balance a healthcare person's professional's view on that encounter, instead of just trying to ascribe these normative guideline based, you know, the group is the thing, not the individual. I'm curious what you think might be some helpful subjects or things that we could better understand within curricular development for students to better help equip them to navigate this.
Well, I'm very biased because I think, of course, philosophy should should help. There are a lot of philosophy of science courses that wouldn't be relevant, but there's also a lot of philosophy of science courses and ethics courses that would be relevant. In Norway, there is a Center for Profession Studies, and they have a Center for Practical Knowledge, and they work a lot with like tacit knowledge. Who's the expert? Is the expert the one that is the most objective, neutral, comes from the outside of perspective where they have observed all the cases, or is it someone who has all this experience from working in the profession? And of course, they're trying to empower people to say that there is some expertise that you can only get from the inside, you know, from actually experiencing on your own body how things work, because a lot of what you do will be, and a lot of the expertise will be tacit. So that's one way to go, which I think is really valuable. And another way to go is, of course, what we do in the Cause Health project, and many other people also do in their philosophy of medicine projects, where to look at the underlying philosophical assumptions. So we have written a book that will be out in May, and it's open access, and it's called Rethinking Causality, Complexity, and Evidence for the Unique Patient. And it's a Cause Health resource, we call it, for health professionals for the clinical encounter. And the idea there is to say that we want to empower health professionals to take part of the foundations of their own practice. So both what is science, what counts as scientific knowledge? Well, that depends on what is knowledge and what kind of knowledge that you're interested in. Is it causal knowledge? Because a lot of people have given up on the causal knowledge because that's assumed to be only human, you know, with repetition and statistics. What is lying behind all these tools, statistical tools that you're using? You need to understand that there are different ways to look at the probability, for instance, and how can this apply in the practice? So we have a philosophical part where we set up the framework, the philosophical framework, and it's written by the philosophers from the Cause Health project. And then the second part, we have, I think we have 8 clinicians and a patient representative, and they show how they use this in practice, how they translate, or how they do something that is in line with the philosophical framework. And I really think those types of debates, it's the only way for someone to be able to say, I'm critical of the paradigm that I'm standing within for these and these and these reasons, you know, and have very good theoretical, philosophical, and practical reasons to back it up, because otherwise they're going to just hear, are you against evidence? Are you against like knowledge? What are you anti-science? And I think this battle of the profession, I mean, once you say that, well, the most efficient way and the most scientific way is to do it the way that the paradigm is saying, it's always going to be the the paradigm that is in power that will define what counts as science, what counts as scientific methods, what counts as the problems we're interested in, what counts as results, what counts as counterexamples, what counts as just bullshit, you know. And that means that it's impossible to fight the paradigm from within. And if you want to fight the paradigm from outside, you need to also have the tools to compare paradigms, which Kuhn said you cannot compare paradigms, but you can do it if you describe which kind of foundational assumptions are different and how they motivate different approaches and different questions and, you know, different solutions. But what I wanted to say in the with the evidence-based and person-centered difference is that it is a paradigmatic change. It's two paradigms, but it's not two medical paradigms. It's two philosophical paradigms. The person-centered approach, I would say it fits really well with the dispositionalist framework, but it's not like they're denying medical theory. You know, it's not like they're saying, no, we need to ask completely different questions about the body and all of those. Yeah, maybe some push it a bit further, but it's still within the same kind of conceptual framework. But what is really different is the philosophical motivation and the philosophical assumptions that are so deep rooted that people wouldn't be aware of them at all. And that's the kind of discussions we need to have. I did have another slide that I could share.
Sure.
So it's one that I often give. So it's a complicated slide, but the idea here is that if you do the evidence-based medicine scientific approach or the person-centered scientific approach, it's actually very different motivations for the two. So in the middle, I have the epistemology, how you approach causation, and on the sides, it's the ontologies or philosophical basis that motivate them. So if you start from the empiricist approach of the Humean worldview, then yeah, you would focus on data. The dispositionalist ontology on the other side says that metaphysics and ontology is more important, but then you need theories and speculations, you know, in your approach. And for each of these lines, it's like contrasting things. So whether you go for the statistics or whether you start from the individual, well, that will depend whether you are a frequentist or a propensity theorist about probability, for instance. If you want to have standardized treatment instead of adaptive treatment, it depends. Are you thinking in a law-like manner where the same cause gives same effect, or are you thinking about dispositional tendencies and that different things happen in different contexts? So this is like my it's a way to sum up the different philosophical tacit motivations for doing something differently. So here you see also at the bottom the n equals 1. Yes, if you start from the dispositions, then n will equal 1 because it's a singularist perspective, and you would go for medical uniqueness. You would look at the contextual situation, and you will do your studies in situ, in the situation. But on the other hand, if you think that you have to have a difference maker, something that gives you a regularity under otherwise similar situations, then you will have to think of either idealized or normal situations where you repeat the setup and see a repetition in the effect. And also this causes as difference makers. Yeah, it gives you the comparative studies where you look at when you have the cause and when you don't have the cause, and you see whether it makes an observable difference. So I don't know if you want to, I mean, it's a lot to take in here.
No, and that's good. Maybe you could share, and we'll have maybe share the slide deck, and then we can just post it up here for folks to have to kind of look at and study. Because I think this is a helpful way to kind of visualize what we've been talking about for the last bit of time here, as far as where these two approaches differ, and where that the ontology or that philosophical foundations from that Humean EBM approach to more of the person-centered dispositionalist approach. Just
Yeah.
understanding some of that philosophical foundations and implicit assumptions that exist in those, I think, can help us have some more helpful discussions on how these two things can kind of coexist, maybe in certain frames, but like you said, to make this dispositionalist framework maybe build off of what also medical knowledge that's already been out there. So yeah, no, I think this would be great.
Yeah, so you see here, I don't want to say that it's always incompatible approaches. It's more about, well, some of them are incompatible,
Yes.
I would say. But it's more about where are you coming from? What is your standard default assumption? Is it that you start from complexity, or is it that you start from composition, that you can add? Because of course some things add. Sometimes things just add up. You can study things in isolation and then you take them together and they add up. But in the dispositionalist perspective, that wouldn't be your default expectation, So it's more about, sometimes you can reduce, sometimes you can distinguish between something that is more biomedical and something that is less biomedical, for instance. But it depends on which assumption, which do you come from. So yes, I will stop sharing.
I think that's a good thing for people to do, is just to kind of examine their own practice. 'Cause I think a lot of times we operate just kind of in this unconscious behavior mode, where these things have been just so ingrained implicitly into our actions and our thoughts and our behaviors as healthcare professionals, that it's helpful to have that kind of metacognitive, really to examine what your thoughts are and where they come from, and maybe some of the foundational things that you just kind of mentally take completely for granted because they've been just so kind of indoctrinated into you and your training and how you've been kind of taught to view and to function as a healthcare professional. So I think that graph is a great way to kind of examine that a little bit. And I think it's important. I think we can definitely have some more fruitful discussions when we kind of understand where we're all coming from and how we can better. I think it's the best way to maybe how do these two can interact the most beneficially for the best interest of the people we're serving. I think that's a great way to go about it.
Well, very typical for when I present this to philosophers is that the philosophers that are on the Humean side, they would say, yeah, but we can account for all of this. It's just that propensities is nothing but what will show itself over long trials. If you try something many times, so it's like long run propensity theory, or we are talking about complexity. But complexity is nothing but the composition of things, So it's more about this nothing but, and you can. So they would be interested in talking about tendencies, but you would divide them into, you would divide the length of the vector into how often something happens. So it would be statistical incidents in the end, So we spend a lot of time trying to explain why, from a dispositionalist perspective, in the way that we understand dispositions, they should be much more contrasting than what we would take as the default assumption. Because the Humean influence has been great also in philosophy, but it's amazing how influential it has been in science, and becoming more and more influential with all this big data and skepticism to theory. That we also see in the social in social science and all public. All public institutions also seem to be dragged into this evidence-based approach, where someone can sit there with the data and decide how things should be. and they think that professionals are big-headed and are afraid of losing power. But I think a lot of people are just really worried about doing a crappy job because they have to just pretend to be blind to the whatever they have in front of them.
Yeah, and strip it down to a guideline or an algorithm or a clinical care pathway that disregards that n equals 1 in front of them. Yeah.
It is, of course, very, it's very comfortable if you don't have to take any responsibility for your own choices, because if you let the computer decide and someone gets harmed, you know, it's like, oops, the computer said I did what was the best intervention, not my fault.
Mm-hmm.
But if you go against the guidelines, then suddenly you're responsible.
Yeah.
You know, and yeah. But I talk to people in Norway who work in hospitals, and they say, if I just follow the guidelines, I would kill people. I have to include some civilian disobedience every day in my work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think it just brings out the complexity of what, you know, we're dealing with humans, and all that kind of impacts what they're going on. I could talk about with you. I could talk with you about this, I should say, for long time, but in the respect of your time and those who are viewing this, I just wanted to thank you so much for your time today. I really enjoyed the discussion. I think those of you who are watching, I'm sure you're getting a huge amount of value out of this, just to kind of see those philosophical foundations that we operate under. And I think you've gotten a good kind of view of where kind of evidence-based medicine, more that Humean philosophy now versus the dispositionalist philosophy lies. And so again, thank you for really giving us a nice picture of that, and a great talk on that. And we really appreciate it.
My name is Rani Lill Anjum. I work at the Norwegian University of Life Sciences outside Oslo. I'm a philosopher by training, and I've been doing philosophy of causation for the last 10 years. And the last 5 years, I worked on causation in medicine and health sciences through the research project called Cause Health. So Cause Health, it's short for causation, complexity, and evidence in health sciences. And I didn't do any philosophy of medicine before. So it's more about the people I met, and among them Roger Carey. And through him, I also met Matthew Lowe. And so I've been getting more and more into this clinical side of philosophy of medicine through this project, which I didn't know before, because I thought people also in public health would think it was interesting. But it seems like all our slogans with n equals one and statistics don't get me and one size does not fit all seem to be a better fit for clinicians. So yeah, this project has taken me places where I couldn't have predicted when I applied for it. So it's been very interesting.